My name is Ben Eric Smith. I'm the Director of Investor Relations, and we're going to talk about the investor checklist today. So something we put together a couple months ago, and it's just because I and Aristotle and a lot of us kept getting questions from people about, is there something that we can concisely put in that just kind of explains the steps that one takes when they invest in real estate property, especially as it pertains to long distance? What are the steps you have to take, and what are the things you have to do to protect yourself? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Alrighty, on to strategy session and slide number 1. So what we're talking about, I touched on it, is investor checklist. So what we like to do and what we have done is put together a checklist, essentially for investors who, or members, or anybody who wants to invest out of state, recognizes that perhaps they live in a more expensive area where it just doesn't make any sense to buy the property down the street or a mile away because it won't cash flow and they'll be subsidizing it every month. And they don't want to do that. So we put together a list. And that list, essentially, item number 1 is, what do you do? Well, the first thing you do is you book a strategy session. And you book a strategy session by joining the network, going online, and essentially booking the strategy session button. There's a real clear little button there, and book a strategy session. And you've already been assigned an investment counselor. It's going to either be myself, or it'll be Aristotle, or it will be Geraldine. One of us will be your investment counselor, and we'll talk you through the whole process. There is a couple steps that you do prior to booking that strategy session, however, and that takes me to the next slide. Scheduling and preparing for a strategy session. When you click that button to schedule the strategy session, which is essentially a 45-minute conversation with one of the 3 folks I just mentioned, we'll talk about your situation, what works and what doesn't work for you, what experience you have, if any, and what's your plan and what is your goals, and we work with you to kind of come up with the plan or at least get you educated in the process. Before you do that strategy session, there's a few things we ask of you. I have a little screenshot here on this slide that explains that. There's a few webinars we'd like you to watch. The top 10 most frequently asked questions. There's another webinar, strategies. There's another one, how to build $1 million portfolio with leverage. And another one, basics of conventional financing. We also recommend, it's not printed out here, but it's always a really good idea to watch as many of the webinars as you can that are archived on our site. You know, maybe not too many, maybe 3 or 4, just to get familiar with what's on there. And the reason we like people to do all that is real simple. You have about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, to talk with either myself, Aristotle, or Geraldine. And if you haven't done any of this stuff, then we end up spending 20 minutes or so going over all this stuff, which is a lot less efficient of a use of time for both of us, mainly for you, the member who's having the session, because you want to know all this stuff already so that we don't have to spend all that time. You can get all that information off the website by doing these things first. Then we can spend more time talking about your situation and what your goals are and how we can help you realize those goals. Funds liquid and available. That's one of the first things that we talk about. You know, we don't want to pry into your personal business, but we like to make sure that you have funds available, because in order to invest in real estate out of state or anywhere, I mean down the street, invest in real estate period, you need to have a certain amount of money. The assumption is that you'll probably need 20%, maybe 25% down. So therefore, if you buy a $100,000 house, you're going to need about $20,000 plus closing costs. Also, the lenders like to see that you have a certain amount of reserves, that you're not, spending your last dime buying a property. So therefore, $30,000 is a safe amount. 20% down on conventional financing. If you're using IRA funds to purchase, which kind of falls outside the scope of this webinar, there's plenty of other information available on the site about using your self-directed individual retirement account to purchase real estate. But for the purposes of this webinar, suffice it to say that you generally need between 40 and 50% down plus closing costs. So the 30K amount really only applies to conventional financing. It's more like 50K if you plan on doing it through your IRA. So that's all I have to say on sufficient funds. Slide number 3, get pre-qualified. One of the first steps in the process also is to get pre-qualified with a lender. Now, Real Wealth Network has a list of 5 lenders that we use. We had really good luck with these lenders. You can use any lender you like. You're not under any obligation to use the lenders on our list. Absolutely not. We just provide that to people because, you know, your friendly neighborhood lender across town that you refinance your primary residence with, you might have a great relationship with them, but most likely that lender probably isn't able to do business in Ohio or Texas or Florida or Chicago, Illinois. Usually most lenders are only qualified in their home state, and whatever lender or bank you use, they have to be authorized or licensed to do business in the state where the property is located. So to get around that, I mean, just to address that, we just have a list of 5 that our members have all used for years and they've had good luck with. So anytime you want that list of recommended lenders, we can get that off to you easily. They're also familiar with investment loans because your friendly neighborhood local lender might be very familiar with principal residence, but there's kind of a whole different list of requirements when you're talking about investment property. You usually have to put a little bit more down. You know, you can't get away with 3%, and you know, there's just different requirements, and you're much better off working with a lender that's familiar with those type of requirements for investors, so you don't get 11th hour surprises that we all love when we're at the 11th hour qualifying for a loan, and suddenly something comes out of the woodwork and a new requirement at the last minute. Not fun. Hate to do that. So it's best to start speaking with them a couple weeks before you intend to purchase. It's always a good idea to be pre-qualified with lender X, Y, or Z. That way, when you go start to look at properties or maybe fly to a city that you've narrowed it down to, you comfortably know and you're confident that you're pre-qualified, so you're good to go. Step 4, researching the different markets. I would say that on the strategy sessions that I have done, I would say that a majority of the time that I spend with members is narrowing it down. It can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes when Real Wealth Network has 14 different affiliates in 12 different markets currently. And I can pretty quickly, depending on your situation, and I'm sure our other, like Aristotle and Geraldine, can do the same, we can eliminate some of those right off the bat based on your situation and your preferences, and then get it down to a more manageable 6 to 8. But that's still 6 to 8 markets. And if you're going to buy property, you want to just narrow it down to maybe 2, maybe 3. I like to narrow it down to 2 and then go visit those 2 if you're able to, and decide which one to start with. And, you know, say if somebody wants to, say they have a goal, we like to spend a lot of time talking about goals, say their goal is that they want to own 10 investment properties within the next, let's just make it simple, within the next 10 years. Then it's ideal that they maybe diversify geographically in, say, a couple different markets. So the first 2 houses they buy in Houston, and then their second 2 houses they buy in Cincinnati, and then they go back to Houston, and they go back to Cincinnati, and then maybe 5 years down the road they're like, okay, I'm going to add 1 more market just to be diversified geographically, but I don't want to be in 10 different markets. That doesn't make any sense to be in that many markets. You can, but I would say why? You're better off being in maybe 2 or maybe 3. Just economy of scale, working with 3 different property managers, 3 different states, 3 different state regulations. It just makes more sense to consolidate it. So to research the different markets, you want to obviously check our website, listen to Kathy's podcasts, and then watch the webinars that are on the website for the different affiliates. So say, using that example, Fred, investor, owns nothing now other than his primary residence, but Fred really has a goal, likes the cash flow, likes the fact that he can own a property outright and have the tenant pay all of his costs. All he has to do is come up with a down payment, and then everything's paid for from then on out, for the most part. Obviously, things can happen. And his goal is to get 10 homes over the next 5 years, let's say. So what I would tell Fred is, okay, let's narrow it down from 12 markets down to, say, 4 or 5. Let's do that together. And then, Fred, your job is to watch the webinars of the 4 we've narrowed it down to, and maybe reduce it down to, say, two or three from there. So then Fred would watch the webinars. Say we narrow it down to city A, B, C, D, and E. He watches the webinars. He then gets the contact information. He calls A, B, C, D, and E market, and he just, based on rapport, based on their level of responsiveness, based on the numbers that he sees on our site for pro formas, he decides, you know what, I feel best about A and C. So great, I give him the contact information for A and C, and he flies out and visits market A and market C. So I think that's probably the most, I mean, I don't want to use the word difficult, but the thing that people struggle with, because all of our markets are good to invest in. Otherwise, they wouldn't be an affiliate in our market. We've done the research. We've determined that the market's good. We've determined that the affiliate is good by checking out references. Our affiliate manager, Tim Horvath, and I have perhaps gone out to the market, checked out the affiliate, kicked the tires on their buildings, looked at the level of rehab, made sure that all the references sparkle and that they've got good reputation in the area. So we know that all of our affiliates are good. It's just a matter of which are the best ones for you. So number 4 here, research different markets. That's probably the most time-consuming aspect of this process, but the time put in is time well spent, because then in the end, you're confident that you've picked the right 2 or 3 markets. So on to slide number 5, contact our affiliates. So once you've narrowed down which markets you're most interested in, then we give you that contact information, and then you contact the affiliates in those markets. And you say, hey, I'm Fred. I'm a Real Wealth Network member, very much interested in your market. I've narrowed it down to you and one other market. Could you please send me what you currently have, Mr. Property Provider Affiliate, in market X? And they will say, sure, Fred, no problem. Here's what we currently have. They'll usually email you a bunch of pro formas. Say they have 8 properties available and ready to go. They'll have a pro forma prepared for each one of the 8, and then you can just look at them and compare them, and maybe you're doing the same thing with the other affiliate, and you're kind of comparing the numbers, just essentially steeling yourself up and getting yourself educated. We also highly recommend a half-day tour with the affiliate. Stick with 3 cities. I've already kind of touched on that, so I won't belabor it. But, when you think about it, you're thinking about investing about $100,000 to $150,000 per property. Now, you're only putting down 20%, 25% of that, but you're still buying a $100,000 6-figure asset. So we think it's highly worth your time to spend a half day in city X, a half day in city Y, and then fly home. Maybe depending on how far away you live, it might be a 2 or at most a 3-day commitment. And by the time you come home, you feel much better about, gee, I looked the affiliate in the eye, I created a rapport with them, I bounced around in the back of a van for 3 hours and saw their properties. I saw the neighborhoods they were in, and I feel pretty good about it. So we recognize that not everybody can do that. Not everybody has the ability to just hop on a plane and disappear for 2 to 3 days, and some people don't do it. But if you can, I highly recommend it. Step 6, speak to the PM. By PM, we mean property manager. So one of the things that Tim and I do when we vet an affiliate out there in the field is, we don't just stick to the property provider. We also talk to their property manager. Now, probably about half of our 14 affiliates in the 12 markets, they do their own property management, like an arm of their company, like Houston, for example, who will be at the event at the end of this month. Husband and wife team owned this company for many, many years. They buy and vet and rehab the properties, but then they will also manage them. So an arm of their company will manage the properties. Now, you're not under any obligation to use them to manage. You can have any property manager manage them. It's completely up to you, but most people prefer to just use the property manager that found the property. Some of our other affiliates, they don't manage the properties. They have a third party do it. And, not one method isn't necessarily better than the other. Different members prefer different things, but either way, it's a good idea for you as a prospective investor to, when you've narrowed it down to a couple cities, call that property manager. talk to them. Make sure you feel good about what they're saying. How long have they been in the area? How many houses do they currently manage? What are their fees? Will you be provided with a monthly statement? Do you have an electronic portal with a login to go to AppFolio or whatever system they use? Just ask some of those basic questions and even beyond basic questions and make sure you're comfortable with everything. We also recommend that you call other companies in the area to get a second opinion. You don't have to do that, but it's always kind of nice. Presumably, if we have vetted this property manager, we've been to their offices, we've checked them out, we feel pretty good about them. But it's always a good idea, that due diligence slide right at the very beginning of this, trust but verify. Call around, see what other people think about property manager X. Step 7, the paperwork. All right, in terms of the paperwork, we always recommend that you get a home inspection. And when you're ready, so say you go to, I don't know, I'll make up a city. Say you go to Jacksonville, and you took a tour in Jacksonville. You've gotten pre-qualified, and you feel really good about it. You liked a house you saw in Jacksonville. When you're ready to move forward with the property, the affiliate will send you all the paperwork. Essentially, you are purchasing, it's a private purchase, you're buying directly from them. There aren't realtors involved. But still, it goes through a title company. It's all above board with an escrow company or a title company holding all the funds on both ends, making sure that everything's legitimate. If you're getting a loan, which most of our investors do because the leverage gives you a much better rate of return and you can buy a lot more properties with a given amount of money, the lender will always insist on an appraisal. So you make sure that the appraisal comes in, and also you want to get a home inspection. Home inspections, between $250 and $450, well worth the time, because you know what? Those home inspectors always find something, whether it's a anti-siphon valve on the hose bibs on the exterior of the house, or a GFI, ground fault circuit interrupter that's not within that's not on an outlet that's within, I don't know, 6 feet of the sink. They'll always find things like that. What you mainly want them to look for, though, is major things, foundation issues, sagging roofs, evidence of water intrusion, things like that. It's just really nice to have someone check for those things. But while they're at it, they look for every little nitpicky thing they can find. And then I usually, and we recommend that you go to the property provider and say, hey, okay, I'm moving forward with this purchase, but could you please fix items 1, 7, 12, 15, and 17 if they found 17 items. It's always a good idea. Make sure that the affiliate will make all the needed repairs before you close. And we have excellent resources on our website if you need help. For example, I purchased 2 properties in Jacksonville myself, October of last year. Got the home inspection, and there were some things like the home inspector points out every little thing. Insulation should be 4 inches deep, but it was only 3 inches deep in the attic. Well, I didn't insist that they add an extra inch of insulation, and there were cracks in the cement driveway. Well, the house was built in 1975. Of course, there's going to be some small cracks in the driveway. So I was reasonable. I didn't ask them to fix that, but I did ask them to fix the cracked tile or the evidence of some leaks in the kitchen floor, and any other little things I definitely wanted them to fix. And now's the time to do it, because the purchase hangs in the balance. So that's the home inspection. Independent appraisal, number 8. I touched on this briefly. I'm getting ahead of myself, but as usual. But if you're financing the purchase, lender will always order an appraisal. That's absolutely crucial. The lender insists. They want to make sure that if you're paying $140,000 for a home in Houston, Texas, that it better appraise for that, because otherwise they're not gonna lend. They're only gonna lend on whatever it appraises for. Some people are buying all cash, and the tendency when you're buying all cash is, well, I don't really need an appraisal because who cares? I'm paying all cash. Well, you definitely want to get an independent appraisal. For the same reason, you want to make sure that you're not paying too much. So appraisals cost $400 or so. Get an appraisal. The property provider, the affiliate, as we call them, can provide you with an appraiser person, or you can just Google appraisers in city X and just call them and have them go out. Highly recommended to do that, if for no other reason, your peace of mind that you haven't paid too much. Our affiliates don't overprice things, because if they did, they wouldn't be an affiliate of ours, but it's still a good idea to always get an appraisal. Slide number 9, homeowners insurance. You want to get quotes for homeowners insurance. You certainly want to talk to 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 local agents or companies. It's amazing sometimes the differentiation between prices. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples. If you get 2 or 3 quotes, make sure you've got $2,500 deductible or whatever. It's consistent deductible on all 3 of them. We also have a referral for a national insurance company who specializes in investment properties. In fact, they won't even take on principal residences. They only do investment properties. So that's kind of nice if you have all your policies with one insurance provider. I flirted with doing that, but I like the insurance providers that I have. So it's completely up to you. I've got a couple with this national company, and so far so good. But we always can do that. And then you certainly want to get that insured before you close. And usually the lenders, that's a condition of the loan. They want to make sure that there's an insurance policy on file, because they're not going to insure a property, they're not going to lend on a property that's not insured. So that's absolutely a step in the process that's crucial. Step 10, marketing your property. Before you close, you want to make sure that you've already made contact with the property manager. Back in that step where you reach out to the property manager, when you know for sure, okay, it's a go. I've looked at the appraisal. The appraisal came in right on point. The homeowner's insurance is ordered. The inspection came back. The property provider, the affiliate, agreed to repair everything. It's a go. I know I'm closing on this property in 2.5 weeks. That would be the time to call the property manager and say, hey, 123 Mockingbird Lane. Remember me, Fred? I called you a couple weeks ago. Well, I'm closing on 123 Mockingbird Lane, so it's a for sure done deal, even though I don't close on it for 2.5 more weeks. Could you go ahead and start researching that? Oh, I just noticed that on the iPhone there, apartment is spelled wrong. Oh, that's nice. Anyway, just make sure that the property manager is actually marketing your property ahead of time. And in many cases, when you buy a property through Real Wealth Network, through one of our affiliates, it may already have a tenant by the time you close. So that renders this step moot. It may already have a tenant in it. That was the case with my Jacksonville properties, and that's the case with many of our affiliates. But if it does not, if it's a new build, or for whatever reason it's vacant, you want to get the property manager on the dime ahead of time and ask them any questions you might have about their operation, which presumably you already did when you talked to them earlier. But just do whatever you need to do to get that thing marketed, and find out how they market it as well. Is it MLS, Craigslist? What is their what marketing channels? Zillow? What do they use to market your property? Now, once you close, you're the happy and proud owner of a property or 2 somewhere in one of our recommended cities. It's kind of like some stock people say. You don't just want to set it and forget it. That's a recipe for, I wouldn't want to say a recipe for disaster, but this is not a completely hands-off investment. We try to make it as hands-off as possible by picking the right affiliates that do a lot of the heavy work for you, by selecting the right properties and being very proactive in managing it, so they're not glorified rent collectors like some property managers tend to be. We want property managers that are proactive, that actually really do a good job in advance of foreseeing problems and being proactive about things. But that doesn't mean that you can just set it and forget it. You definitely want to check your statements each month. You'll get a statement every month from your property manager. 123 Mockingbird Lane, rent collected $1,000, 8% management fee, $80. Oh, there was we had to go out and fix a dishwasher repair. Okay, all right, $75. And then the remainder is sent to you minus whatever reserves they hold. Usually they want to hold like about $250 reserves in the account, so they can handle small things that come up. But you definitely want to review that statement every single month. Only takes a couple minutes. Highly recommended. And then, you know what's going on with your property. If you see there was a dishwasher repair in April, and gee, another dishwasher repair in May, and then another one in June, it's like, what are you guys doing? Why are you repairing the same dishwasher? I could have bought one by this time. You just want to stay on top of things. Well, hey, congratulations. You're now the proud owner of an investment property. So the other thing that our investor checklist says is, maybe this is just the beginning. And this is one of the things that we talk about in our strategy session is, what is your end goal? And, I personally like to work backwards. So if one has a goal of, I want $90,000 of passive income in 7 years. Well, okay, let's run the numbers. If you buy 10 $100,000 properties, it'll take X number of years to pay them off, usually 11 or 12. And once all 10 of those properties are paid off, then they'll probably give you about, roughly $750 of positive cash flow a month. And 750 times 10 times 12 months is magically $90,000. So we kind of work backwards, and you tell us what your income requirements are or what you would like to see, and then we can kind of put together a plan for you based on those income requirements. So that's one way of doing it anyway. But hopefully this is just the beginning. People have a couple different options. If you own one house or two houses or 5 houses, you're going to have positive cash flow coming in. And if I use that example of the $100,000 property, if it's renting for $1,000 a month, which is the 1% rule, pretty typical, plus or minus $100, but let's just say it's renting for $1,000, your principal plus interest plus taxes plus insurance plus management fee in most markets will probably be about $650. So you own this property. You bought it for $100,000. You put 20% down, or $20,000, $4,000 closing costs, so you're out $24,000. Now that property is bringing in $1,000 a month minus about $650 total costs, PITIM, like I just said. So you've got positive cash flow of $350. So the question then becomes, what do you do with that $350? Well, we recommend, and most people prefer this option, you use that $350 to pay down the loan. And if you do that, it'll take around 11 or 12 years typically to pay that 30-year loan off completely. And that's true whether you have one house or 20 houses. So you have to decide as an investor, do I want to use the positive cash flow to pay down the loans, or do I want to use the positive cash flow to build up in an account, and then once it's added up to $24,000, using my example, I buy another house? So that's up to you. It depends on whether you're in payoff mode or acquisition mode. Most people, when they're starting out, they're in acquisition. And then, they're in acquisition mode, and then once they're done acquiring, they flip a switch and they start paying it off.